The young soldier stood rigidly at the back of the formation, his back ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on the middle distance as the morning sun began to burn away the light fog hovering over the parade ground at Fort Bragg. Around him, the rest of the battalion stood in precise ranks, a sea of tan berets and camouflage uniforms, each man a perfect replica of the one next to him. But the young soldier felt anything but uniform. He felt like a forgery, a child playing dress-up in a world of genuine warriors. His name was Marcus Webb, and at 22 years old he had just accomplished something that should have felt like the pinnacle of achievement. After 18 months of the most grueling training the United States Army could devise, after survival exercises in the swamps of North Carolina and medical simulations that pushed him to the edge of physical and mental collapse, he had finally earned his place in the Special Operations Medical Program known as Trauma 3. It was an intensive course designed to turn ordinary soldiers into battlefield medics, capable of performing emergency surgeries under enemy fire, of keeping soldiers alive when every second counted and every piece of equipment was stained with mud and blood. But as the battalion commander began to walk the ranks, inspecting the troops before the morning run, Marcus felt a familiar sensation crawling up his spine. It was the same feeling he had carried with him since the first day of training, a whisper in the back of his mind that told him he did not belong here. The other soldiers in his unit called him by a nickname that had followed him from basic training, a label that had stuck to him like a burr on a wool sock. They called him the Toy Warrior. The name had started as a joke, the kind of casual cruelty that flourished in the pressure cooker of military life. It began when one of the drill sergeants had discovered that Marcus, before enlisting, had worked as a product development assistant for a toy company in California. He had spent 2 years designing action figures, sculpting tiny plastic muscles, and painting miniature camouflage patterns on figures that were meant to represent the very men he now stood beside. He knew how to make a toy soldier look authentic. He knew the precise shade of olive drab that collectors expected, the exact placement of unit patches on a 3-inch figure. But knowing how to paint a wound on a piece of plastic was nothing like knowing how to pack a real wound with gauze while bullets whizzed overhead. The nickname had spread like wildfire. Toy Warrior. It was painted on his locker in black marker. It was whispered during formation runs, loud enough for him to hear but quiet enough to escape punishment. It followed him into the mess hall, into the barracks, into the simulation exercises where he tried desperately to prove that he was more than the sum of his civilian past. He had learned to keep his head down, to work twice as hard as everyone else, to volunteer for every unpleasant task in the hope that sheer effort would eventually erase the label. But the label remained, a shadow that walked with him everywhere. The soldier standing to Marcus's right, a broad-shouldered veteran named Kowalski, who had already served 2 tours in Afghanistan, glanced over and smirked. The expression said everything. It said, "What are you doing here, toy boy?" It said, "When the real fighting starts, you will break, and the rest of us will have to carry you." Marcus said nothing. He had learned that saying nothing was safer than saying something he would regret. The battalion commander continued his slow progress down the line, pausing occasionally to adjust a strap or inspect a rifle. He was a lean man in his early 40s, with close-cropped graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh environments. His name was Colonel Sarah Khan, and she was something of a legend in the special operations community. One of the few women to rise to such a rank in the male-dominated world of special warfare, she had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had been wounded in combat, and had personally pulled 2 of her soldiers from a burning vehicle during an ambush in the Shah-e-Khat Valley. Her reputation was formidable, and her gaze was said to cut through lies like a scalpel through flesh. When she reached Marcus, she stopped. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He kept his eyes forward, his breathing steady, his body perfectly still. But he could feel her attention like a physical weight. She was studying him, and he had no idea why. Then her eyes dropped to his chest. On the left side of his uniform, just above the pocket, Marcus wore the unofficial patch that all graduates of the Trauma 3 program were permitted to display. It was a small, embroidered emblem, nothing official, just a piece of unit pride that the soldiers had designed themselves years ago. The patch showed a Roman numeral 3 inside a circle of 13 stars, the stars arranged in the pattern of the Betsy Ross flag. Beneath the numeral, a single word was stitched: resilient. Colonel Khan's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the patch as if confirming that it was real. Then she straightened and looked directly into Marcus's face. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the absolute authority of someone who expected an answer and would accept nothing less than the truth. Marcus swallowed. "It's the course patch, ma'am. Trauma 3. We all wear them." "I know what it is," the colonel said. "I want to know where you got this specific patch." Marcus felt confusion wash over him. The patch was standard issue, at least as standard as unofficial unit patches could be. Everyone in the program had one. Everyone wore it with pride. But something in the colonel's tone told him that this was not a routine question. "I was issued it when I graduated, ma'am, from the supply sergeant." The colonel nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the patch. Then she did something that made the entire formation hold its breath. She reached into her own uniform pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet. From the wallet, she extracted a photograph, creased and faded with age, and held it up next to Marcus's chest. The photograph showed a group of soldiers, perhaps a dozen of them, posing in front of a Humvee in what looked like the mountains of Afghanistan. They were young, dirty, exhausted, but grinning with the particular bravado of men who had just survived something terrible. In the center of the group, a young captain knelt with his arm around the shoulder of a sergeant. On the captain's chest, clearly visible even in the faded photograph, was a patch identical to the one Marcus wore. The same Roman numeral 3, the same circle of stars, the same word, resilient. "That captain," Colonel Khan said quietly, "was my brother." The formation had gone completely silent. Even the birds in the trees along the edge of the parade ground seemed to have stopped singing. Marcus stared at the photograph, then at the colonel, then back at the photograph. He did not know what to say. He did not know what was expected of him. "My brother served in the first Trauma 3 class," the colonel continued, her voice low enough that only Marcus and the soldiers immediately nearby could hear. "Back when the program was experimental, back when they were making it up as they went along, learning how to save lives in the worst places on Earth. He designed that patch. He drew it himself on a napkin in a forward operating base in Kandahar, and he had it made by a local seamstress who barely spoke English. He gave it to every soldier in his unit as a symbol of what they had accomplished together." She paused, her thumb tracing the edge of the photograph. "He was killed 3 months later, IED on a supply route. He died saving his medic, pulling him out of the kill zone even though he was already hit himself. They found this photograph in his pocket when they recovered his body." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, the strange collision of history and coincidence that had brought him here, wearing this patch, standing before this woman. "I have spent 15 years trying to find out what happened to the original design," the colonel said. "The seamstress disappeared during the fall of Kabul. The napkin was lost. The patch in this photograph was the only evidence that it ever existed. And now I find it here, on the chest of a soldier who wasn't even born when my brother died." The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Then Colonel Khan did something that no one expected. She smiled. It was a small expression, barely a twitch of the lips, but it transformed her face entirely. For a moment she looked less like a legendary commander and more like a woman remembering something precious. "Supply sergeant, you said?" "Yes, ma'am." "The current supply sergeant wouldn't know the history of these patches. They've been through a dozen iterations since my brother's time, but somehow you ended up with the original pattern, the one that matches exactly what my brother created." She shook her head slowly. "The Army is a strange place, soldier. Coincidences like this don't happen by accident." She stepped back, returning the photograph to her wallet and the wallet to her pocket. Then she looked at Marcus again, and this time her gaze was different. It was not the cold assessment of a commander evaluating a subordinate. It was something warmer, more human. "What's your name, soldier?" "Specialist Marcus Webb, ma'am." "Webb." She tested the name, rolling it around in her mouth. "The Toy Warrior." Marcus felt his face flush. Of course she had heard the nickname. Everyone had heard the nickname. "My brother," the colonel said, "was a philosophy major in college. Before he enlisted, before any of this, he spent 2 years teaching English in rural Japan. The other soldiers in his unit called him the professor. They meant it as an insult. They thought he was soft, that he didn't belong. And then he pulled them out of a burning vehicle, one after another, while the ammunition inside cooked off and the flames melted the paint on his helmet. After that, they still called him the professor. But it meant something different." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Nicknames are what other people give you. What you do with them is what you give yourself. Wear that patch with pride, Specialist Webb. You earned it. And if anyone gives you trouble about where you came from, you send them to me." She straightened, stepped back, and continued her inspection down the line as if nothing had happened. The formation remained frozen in place, every soldier acutely aware that they had just witnessed something significant. Kowalski, standing to Marcus's right, stared straight ahead, but his jaw was tight, and his knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle sling. Marcus stood perfectly still, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He looked down at the patch on his chest, at the 3 inside the circle of stars, at the word resilient stitched in careful thread. It was just a piece of fabric, just a symbol, just something that hundreds of soldiers had worn before him. But now it felt different. Now it felt like a connection to something larger than himself, a link to a man he had never met. A captain who had died saving his medic in the mountains of Afghanistan 15 years ago. The morning run began, and the formation moved out in perfect synchronization, boots pounding the pavement in a rhythm that had been repeated 1,000,000 times before. Marcus ran with them, his lungs burning, his legs aching, but his mind somewhere else entirely. He thought about the professor, about a philosophy major who became a hero. He thought about a napkin in Kandahar and a seamstress in Kabul, and a patch that had somehow traveled across years and continents to land on his chest. He thought about coincidence and fate and the strange ways that the universe wove its patterns. When the run ended and the formation dispersed, Marcus found himself standing alone near the edge of the parade ground. The fog had burned off completely now, and the sun was warm on his face. He reached up and touched the patch on his chest, feeling the raised threads beneath his fingertips. "Webb." He turned. Kowalski stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kowalski did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black marker. "I owe you an apology," Kowalski said. His voice was rough, uncomfortable. "The stuff on your locker, the nickname, it was out of line." Marcus looked at the marker, then at Kowalski's face. "What's that for?" Kowalski shrugged. "Figured you might want to cross it out yourself, or write something else, whatever." Marcus took the marker. He weighed it in his hand, feeling its solidity, its permanence. Then he handed it back. "Leave it," he said. "I'm going to earn that name back. When I do, I want everyone to remember what it used to mean." Kowalski stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. He pocketed the marker and walked away without another word. Marcus turned back toward the barracks, toward his locker with its painted insult, toward the future that stretched out before him like an unknown country. He thought about the colonel's brother, about the professor, about a man who had turned an insult into a badge of honor. He thought about the patch on his chest and the weight it carried. The toy warrior walked across the parade ground, and for the first time since he had arrived at Fort Bragg, he did not feel like a forgery. He felt like a soldier. He felt like he belonged. 3 weeks later, Marcus received orders for deployment. His unit was being sent to a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, a place where the mountains rose like jagged teeth, and the thin air carried the crack of small arms fire on a daily basis. The night before they shipped out, he sat on his bunk, packing his gear, checking and rechecking his medical kit. The patch was still on his uniform, still bright and clean, still bearing the symbol that connected him to a dead captain and a living legend. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." Colonel Khan stepped into the room. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple sweater, and without her uniform she looked smaller, more human, almost fragile. But her eyes were the same, sharp and knowing. "I wanted to see you before you left," she said, "to give you something." She held out a small leather pouch, old and worn, the leather soft with age. Marcus took it carefully, feeling the weight of it in his palm. "What is it?" "Open it." He loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into his hand. A patch fell out. It was old, faded, the edges frayed, the colors washed out by years of sun and sweat. But the design was unmistakable. The Roman numeral 3 inside the circle of stars. The word resilient stitched in careful thread. "That was my brother's," the colonel said. "The one he was wearing when he died. They gave it to me with his personal effects. I've carried it for 15 years, and now I want you to carry it." Marcus stared at the patch, then at the colonel. "Ma'am, I can't take this. This is—" "You can," she interrupted. "You will. My brother believed in symbols. He believed that what we wear on our chests matters, that it reminds us who we are and what we're capable of. That patch reminds me of him, but it can't do any good sitting in my pocket. Out there in the mountains, it might remind you that you're part of something bigger than yourself. It might remind you that resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every single time." Marcus looked at the patch in his hand. It was just a piece of fabric, just threads and dye, just a symbol. But it felt heavier than anything he had ever held. "I don't know if I'm worthy of this," he said quietly. "Neither did my brother," the colonel said. "Neither does any soldier who's honest with themselves. Worthiness isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn every day by choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you'd rather run. You've already started earning it. Now go finish the job." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Specialist. The Toy Warrior. You told Kowalski you were going to earn that name back. Do you know how?" Marcus shook his head. "You earn it by forgetting about it entirely, by focusing on the mission, on your soldiers, on the lives you're there to save. When you stop caring what they call you, that's when they'll start calling you something else. That's when you'll become the name you choose for yourself." She left, and the door closed softly behind her. Marcus sat on his bunk for a long time, the two patches in his hands. The new one, bright and clean, fresh from the supply sergeant. The old one, faded and frayed, carried by a dead hero across 15 years of memory. He thought about the mountains waiting for him, the battles yet to be fought, the lives he might save or fail to save. He thought about the professor and the colonel and the strange chain of events that had brought him here. Then he carefully pinned the old patch to the inside of his body armor, close to his heart. The new patch remained on his uniform, visible to the world, a symbol of his training and his unit. But the old patch, the one that mattered, the one that carried the weight of history and sacrifice, that one he kept hidden, a secret reminder of what he was fighting for. The next morning, he boarded the transport plane with the rest of his unit. As the C-17 lifted off from the runway and the North Carolina coastline shrank beneath them, Marcus looked out the small window at the receding land. He thought about the colonel standing on the tarmac watching them go. He thought about her brother, buried somewhere in a cemetery he had never seen. He thought about the patch against his chest, hidden but present, a guardian angel made of thread. Kowalski sat across from him, already asleep, his head lolling against the webbing of the troop seat. The other soldiers were scattered throughout the cabin, some sleeping, some staring at nothing, some checking their equipment for the 100th time. They were all scared, Marcus knew. They were all pretending they weren't. That was part of the job, pretending until the pretending became real. The plane droned on, eating up the miles, carrying them toward a destination that none of them could truly imagine. Marcus closed his eyes and let the vibration of the engines wash through him. He did not think about nicknames or patches or the judgments of other men. He thought about the job ahead, the soldiers beside him, the lives that might depend on him in the weeks and months to come. He thought about resilience, about getting back up, about the simple, stubborn act of refusing to quit. When he opened his eyes again, they were crossing the Atlantic, and the sun was setting behind them, painting the clouds in shades of orange and gold. The toy warrior looked out at the beauty of it, at the vastness of the sky and the ocean below, and for a moment he felt small, insignificant, a speck in an infinite universe. But then he touched the patch hidden beneath his body armor, and he remembered that even specks could matter. Even specks could carry the weight of history. Even specks could choose to be resilient. The plane flew on into the gathering dark, toward a country that would test everything he was and everything he hoped to become. And Marcus Webb, the soldier they called the Toy Warrior, sat quietly in the noise and the vibration and the closeness of the troop compartment, and he waited for whatever came next. He was ready, or as ready as anyone could be. And that, he had learned, was enough.